Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again. This is we continue our conversation with the noted Dr. Atkinson from the Distinguished University of West Indies at the Mona campus in the field of anthropology. Welcome back once again, Dr. Atkinson.
Thank you.
The moving forward, so we talk about how the different sea levels and the land bridge allow people from the South America to move up into the Caribbean area, and from the up on the Florida coming down to the Bahamas, down into and from other parts of the coming from the Yucatan Peninsula and the Mexico coming over. Um, so moving forward, we now come to the period where the native peoples came in contact with the
Europe.
Europeans. Um, how how would you characterize their initial interaction? Was it friendly? Was it violent?
I think it depends on where you're, which island you're referring to. So, in terms of Jamaica, initially, historical sources say that a few Taino came out into the bay because Columbus and his sailors they docked at this area. It's now called Discovery Bay, associated with the European contact. But it's a bay in close to the St. Anne's parish on the north coast. That's also a peak Taino area in terms of sites and settlements. And so it is reported that they met Columbus ship, a few in their canoes, which is canoe or dugout canoes. Some of them would have been armed, with their weapons like bows and arrows and other tools they use for protection. So initially, the first encounter may not have been welcoming, because these would, Columbus and his ships would have been strange vessels for them. Probably, something they would not have typically comprehended. And I don't think that would have been unique to Jamaica. I think most, places in the Americas where there was contact with the Europeans, they may have been, quite a lot of awe and wondering if they're, what they're seeing is actually real. So for us, this encounter, I don't like to use the word encounter though, because the consequence of the contact is, it's pretty horrific. We use the term encounter to make reference of the interactions between the Spanish, the Taino, the English, and then ultimately the African. And the truth of the matter is that two of these groups ended up in enslavement, particularly the Taino and the African. They don't usually associate the Taino experience as enslavement, but it resulted in contracted labor systems, whether they're labeled as reparamento or encomienda. It is still some sort of not voluntary labor system. And then with the Africans, we do know that it resulted in a transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery, which is inhumane. So they're mixed views in terms of what the contact would have been. But I do know that the evidence, in terms of archaeological evidence, reveals that early sites like Oristan in the northwest, and sites like Sevilla la Nueva, which was established by 1509. Jamaica became property of the Columbus family. I think it's a Santa Fe. I'm a little, forgive me. But I think that is the agreement where the island was owned by the Columbus family. And so in 1509, Columbus's son established settlement there. Sevilla La Nueva then becomes the first European capital of the island. Later on, it becomes, we have St. Jago de la Vega, 1534 up to 1872. And then, now Kingston from 1872 to the present. So they use the males largely as labor force for like mines. So one of the original names for Sevilla La Nueva was the Sevilla de Oro, because the hope was that they would have been able to find gold in Jamaica. But unfortunately, Jamaica doesn't produce large quantities of gold naturally. So by 1512, the island became used as an agricultural base. So we find the introduction of plants and animals. So plants like sugar by 1515, our first sugar mill 1517, and the remains of that still exists, and it's one of the oldest in the Western Hemisphere. We have efforts of trying to mass produce products like cotton and tobacco, basically establishing plantation systems and using the indigenous men for the labor, and then they would use the women for domestic labor. So even at Seville, there's evidence of what is called New Seville wear, which is a pottery tradition, which uses Taino methodology, but the shapes of the vessels are not Taino. They kind of look like they're mimicking European vessels. So we believe that, it is Spanish influence on the creation of these. And you see examples of that in other parts of the region known as Creole, that kind of creolized wear. And they formed unions with these women, some voluntary, some not voluntary. Some of them were married to them legally, and some were just used as concubines. So, you have many consequences of the contact. You have cultural consequences and you have biological consequences. So some of the biological consequences, of course, is the rapid decline in the populations of the indigenous peoples. I'm not saying it led to extinction at all. I do believe it's very difficult for you to have complete biological and cultural extinction. Those are very, very rare cases. So diseases like measles, mumps, smallpox, and so forth wreaked havoc. I mean, the estimates for the Americas range from, as at the lowest level, 50% of the population, to high levels of 95% of the population. But it is really hard to know for sure, because it's not like they had censuses at that time, like how we have modern day censuses where you know exactly how many people populated an area and so forth. And then so we do have that rapid decline in population. We do have the creation of new ethnic and cultural groups, offsprings of the Spanish and the Taino, Mezito and Mezita. There were also offsprings when the Africans were introduced. So the first set of Africans were introduced as initially domestic servants around 1513 in some parts of the region and islands like Jamaica. And interactions with the Africans resulted in populations known as either Maroon. In Latin American context, they may be viewed as Sambo or Zambo. I mean, these are viewed as derogative terms now, but historically, sadly, these are the classifications and so forth.
This is a very fascinating conversation. What can you tell us about the Taino language? Was it they had a written language, or was it just oral?
No, it's it wasn't a written language, but it is oral, and a lot of the language. So it's originally from the Arawakan language family, which is one of the largest language families especially in South America. So there are similarities with Kalinago, with Lokono, and with Taino, and there is a culture known as Garifuna, which is a mixture of Africans and the Kalinago, which is also examples of contemporary Arawakan language. A lot of the names of geographic spaces, I mentioned Cuba, I mentioned Haiti, even the indigenous name of Jamaica, are ways in which the language has survived. It has also survived through the names of plants and animals. So animals like the manatee, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
Yes.
colloquially it's called sea cow, that's Taino. Iguana, that's Taino. Trees like or plant crops like mami. That's a very interesting fruit. It's indigenous to the region. It kind of has like 5 flavors in one. So it's a little peach, a little mango. I don't know if you know mango,
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
yes, but it's really delicious. Guayaba, sorry, or what we know as guava. I don't know if you get a lot of guava, but in Jamaica, guava is like gold here. So the names, even Cayman, that's Taino for crocodile or any of that type of reptilian family. So many of the even pineapple. So the scientific name for pineapple is anana, and that is one of the names for pineapple amongst the Taino. Hurricane, which we get hurricane from, canoa, tobacco, barbacoa, barbecue, all of these names, some of them have been retained in Spanish, mostly in Spanish, but some have survived in English or derivations of English. So there is that, that survival. It's very, very fascinating. Quite a few contemporary Taino have like published books, based on, studies on these language and linguistic, traditions and so forth. And it was once perceived as a dead language. And, I'm sure you can appreciate how important language is a part of cultural identity. So for it even to be labeled as a dead language is just ominous, for that cultural survival. But no.
I digress. It's interesting because when I was growing up, I was born in the United States, but I grew up in Northern England. I did not.
Right.
I went to Oxford, and we had and even today we have employees from Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
so from the Philippines, and I was introduced to a lot of food systems like breadfruit and ackee. They're also connected to the Taino, or those.
Well, breadfruit and ackee is connected to the Africans, because breadfruit and ackee was brought as enslaved African food. So a lot of our contemporary food is actually enslaved African food, like green bananas and so forth, that have been and saltfish that's been popularized. So like across the region, a lot of us use some sort of saltfish as our national dish. But foods associated with the Taino that we still eat is, so in Jamaica we call it bami, and it's a cassava bread, a bread made from the cassava. Other islands they call it cassava, but we call it bami. But bami just means a small portion of cassava, small portion of it. And to be honest, our bami is much smaller in size compared to other islands. So we still do consume that. That's made from sweet bitter cassava, which has to be processed because bitter cassava contains cyanide. So the indigenous process of how to eliminate the toxins is still used in many parts of the Caribbean, and Jamaica included. We still eat sweet cassava. We eat it, like we boil it. We call it food or ground provisions. It's just really things from the earth that we usually boil, and we eat with meat. So like flour. So we make dumplings. Most cultures have dumplings, so we do our dumplings fried or boiled, or and then like our yams, and our potatoes and cassava and so forth. So we group, and green bananas, we group all of that as ground provisions. We still love fish, and yeah, Jamaicans are very partial to anything from the sea. Particularly, they don't really like freshwater fish. So aquaculture doesn't do well here. But I think a lot of that is, traditions still being passed down from the indigenous, because the fish that we consume or prefer are the same types of fish that the Taino showed preference for. So like snapper and parrot, Jamaicans loves any type of snapper fish, and parrot. And even our fishing techniques, the use of the nets, the use of the seines, the fish traps, and so forth, are all following these traditional practices. Even how we make the canoes is the same dugout fashion from the silk cotton tree. So, I mean, probably I think people don't realize it, because a lot of people view history as dead, but they don't realize that even their actions each day, it perpetuates aspects of their heritage and their history. And I think we need to make greater efforts to enlighten our their home, and the Taino included.
Yeah, it's interesting because so at the moment we're I know that in some countries like in North America they have they set aside lands for the native peoples.
Mm-hmm.
How are Jamaica treated their native peoples?
Well, they don't formally. Okay, so that's also quite contentious.
Mm-hmm.
So so the Jamaican government recognizes indigenous culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that there are various aspects of our indigenous culture that we still practice and still survive. They don't formally recognize indigenous peoples. Now, for me as an archaeologist and anthropologist, I don't know how they separate the two, but apparently they find the strategy to separate the two. So even though in reality we do have various indigenous peoples, so we have Taino descendants, we have Maroons, and we have Rastafari, because Rastafari is a culture that evolved here, so they can be recognized as an indigenous group. They are not at this point given certain rights that would be associated with indigenous peoples, but it is something that the indigenous groups and communities are working towards. So this includes rights to self-identify, but self-identify is not just I say Daka Taino, Daka Boyanani. So I just said I am Taino, I am Boyanani. Boyanani is my Taino name. It means sweetwater flower. Oh. I can't make up that name. That is a name that has been given to me through a formal naming ceremony ritual, and has been accepted as a part of the Taino community. So you can't just identify it and say, I am Taino. You have to be a part of a recognized Taino community. And we do have one particular group. They call themselves the Jamaican hummingbirds. Yukayeke Yamaye Guanai. Yukayeke Village, Yamaye, Jamaica, Guanai, another name for hummingbird. And they actually installed their cacique in a ceremony in 2019. And this was done under a group known as Boiho Atebe, the Grandmother's Circle, and they're tied with the United Confederation of Taino Peoples. But currently there's a big debates in terms of the rights of indigenous people in terms of land. There's a lot of contention with the government, with the Maroons over the lands. Prior to the formation of Jamaica as a state, the Maroons had a treaty with Britain. The first Maroon War, which ended about in the 1730s, resulted in them having sovereignty to some extent and having particular places where they are supposed to be independent from what later becomes the Jamaica that we know. Jamaica is currently moving towards becoming a republic. So all of these questions about land rights are in the conversation right now.
Okay. Are there any Tahina in any elected government position at the moment?
Well, we've had in the past people who would say that they identify as Taino or as a descendant or had ancestry. So, for example, we had a prime minister, Sir Alexander Bustamante. He's our first prime minister. He's from Westmoreland, and he used to say that he had Arawak ancestry. But he's the only notable public figure that I've known of. A lot of other people are probably more private with it, but you do have, as I mentioned, the Taino, and it's not the only Taino village. There are others, and they do have their members, but they don't have a space like a reservation. Like what we have in Dominica for the Kalinago, or in North America, in the USA. Yeah, there are no reservations.
Right. And what steps are being taken to preserve Tahina culture and heritage in Jamaica?
Well, one, I would say public education. That's where communities and like museums are really, really important. I know it is a part of the curriculum in terms of both social studies and history. So social studies is kind of a little of a mix with history, geography, and civics. And that is taught at the primary and at the secondary level. We do our coat of arms. I must say, I get a lot of pushback personally because phenotypically, I am what people perceive as what a West African or West African descendants would look like. I mean, in the Americas, you can't watch what somebody looks like on the outside because there's so many components, eh? And I'm a proud Black woman, so I have no problem with that. But at the same time, I do have indigenous ancestry, and most people don't know anything about my background before they make these statements. No, I find that because majority of Jamaicans are of African descent, they feel like we don't have a right to have ties to the Taino. So like the other countries like Cuba, DR, and Puerto Rico, there may be more biological ties to in terms of Taino legacy, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in our country, in countries like Jamaica and Haiti. And in fact, we've made probably more overt efforts in terms of holding on to this indigenous ties than other places. Our coat of arms comprises of a Taino man and a Taino woman, along with indigenous elements like the pineapple and the crocodile. And this is a coat of arms we've had from the 17th century, about 1661. But when we obtained independence in 1962, we didn't change it. We kept it, and that speaks volumes that we chose to keep. We changed the motto underneath, so it's no longer two Indies serve one master, which would have been Britain at that time. It is now out of many one people to reflect the cultural diversity, of the island. We also have a Taino Day, so we pushed back against the celebration of the Spanish arrival on the 5th of May, 1494, and chose to use that time in May to give recognition to the indigenous people, who unfortunately suffered, really negative consequences or repercussions of the contact with the Spanish. So in the public sector, they have, either lectures or exhibitions or some activity promoting Taino culture, particularly during that time. And also Taino is also recognized when the Jamaican Maroons have their various activities. They're also included. So there's actually an indigenous leadership group. It's called YCAL. So it is the Yamaye Council of Indigenous Leaders, and it includes Taino and Maroons as their membership. So there are different ways in which we recognize the Taino. Hold on, I'm gonna mute for a sec. I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, no problem.
Right. So
So,
did that help to answer?
yes, yes, very much so. And I'm also curious, like the Tahitian language, especially, what are they, do they have like an attempt to um, keep it, maintain its existence, and are they, I've seen
Yes.
like children's book kind of that are kind of themed. Can talk about those?
Well, okay, so I mean, some of them are based off in individual initiatives, not necessarily like a government-led initiative. So, not just in Jamaica, but there's been kind of what is viewed as a Taino revival. They started from as early as the 19th century in what are perceived to be the Spanish-speaking Caribbean islands. So islands like Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and in Cuba. They've been very, very forthright in terms of identifying that they are Taino and that Taino is still alive. There are lots of this, debates about the concept of pure Taino versus those of us that are mixed. I mean, for me, I as somebody of mixed heritage, I don't have any appreciation for that argument. You are what you are, and we're collections of parts of different parts of our heritage, and all parts of our heritage should be acknowledged. Now, in Jamaica, especially from about 2010, there is an entity. It's called Sankofi, and it's led by Carol Miller, or she's a Akan priest, sorry, a Komfo Fofie. And she was very, very instrumental in reviving, public perceptions and promotions about the Taino. And she started certain activities, planning events associated with the Maroon festivals, like a Taino Day, and she brought Taino from other parts of the diaspora each year, and they had interactions with the public, and there was even a spiritual run, Taino Run, Jamaica, and that is based off the Native American spiritual run, the Peace and Dignity runs that are normally done every 4 years, and I think it starts in like New York and it ends in Central America and so forth. So we participated in that, and then other activities would include my own personal work as an archaeologist and an advocate for the Taino for over 25 years. One of them is my children's book, Boy and Annie, A Taino Girl's First Adventure.
Could you show
Which,
us a copy?
oh, yes, I can, but I would have to pause. Can you pause? Let me get a copy. Sure. All right.
And he will be Dr. Atkinson will be back momentarily. Please stand by.
Hi. Can you see?
Sure, excellent.
All right. So this is Boy and Ann. It's a children's book. So it's targeted for kids from about 7 and up. And so it's beautifully illustrated. So it has like a message to parents and teachers talking about who the Taino were, and that confusion that you mentioned earlier in terms of Arawak and Carib. So I talk about that. I also talk about the importance of language, as a way to push back from the concept of dead language. And then it's done in a story form, and the main protagonist is a Taino girl named Boyanani. And then in addition to it, I include Taino words. So Taino words are throughout, but I also have a glossary, right, which has the words, how you pronounce it, and their meanings, right? And then, of course, there are images of some of them, like anano, pineapple, anato, or biha. I don't know. It has a seed that produces a reddish orange dye, and they use it for food coloring, and indigenous groups, especially in the Caribbean, use it as for body paint. It produces a red color. Biha, we call it that also. And other. So I'm working on the second one to this. I'm very proud. It's a resource guide for the Ministry of Education, which is what I wanted.
And can people get it on Amazon to purchase?
No, I don't have. The problem is, being in the Caribbean, you're kind of limited because I don't, have like a distributor in the States. If I had somebody or an entity in the States, then I could, ship stuff there and then it can be distributed. So for now, it's just regular post, people order and then I send it by, Jamaican mail.
Because
Yeah.
like Amazon now has something called a print on demand, where like when you slap you might want to take a look at it, you might want to investigate this further.
Yes. 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 Yes.
You publish on Amazon. It's automatic. When somebody buy the book, Amazon print a copy and send it to them. And but they take 50% and you get 50%.
Right. Okay.
That's something you can take a look into. I know other artists in the Caribbean have used it so as to shrink the space shipping stuff all over the world from Jamaica.
Yeah, because printing is very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
And with print on demand, you only print one when somebody buy a copy. Excess backup inventory. Speaking of books and language, do they have a Taino museum in Jamaica at the moment?
Well, we used to have a formal museum at White Mall that was established in 1965, but then it closed in the early 2000s. But they moved most of the collection to National Museums Jamaica, which is in the heart of Kingston, which is our capital. So it's a part of the permanent display, the exhibition on the Taino. And then you can also see Taino cultural material at other museums. So for example, at Seville, which was the original Spanish capital, they have a museum there. And then there's the National Gallery, which does have a few Taino artifacts on display. So, for example, the semis associated with Aboko is one of our most amazing Taino discoveries. Caves have served as what we view as a safe repository. So it is believed that the Taino hid like their wooden sculptures that are associated to the religious practice in caves to prevent the Spanish from destroying them, and also like their doors, their ceremonial seats in caves. And Abaco, we found three semis associated. They were originally found in the 1940s, but then so one of the issues, Jamaicans tend to culturally fear caves. I'm not quite sure. I can understand, but I'm not quite sure how it started. And when they encountered some of these objects, you know, they thought they were associated with Obia, so it led to some of them being destroyed. Yeah. So it was returned by the person who initially discovered them, and then in the 1970s, another person found them, and he kept them, and he stored them under his bed for like 20 years. And then in the 90s, he contacted the Jamaica National Heritage Trust and told them about, you know, this find. And then, you know, it was three authentic Taino sculptures. One is a ceremonial staff, one is a semi, and the other one is like a ceremonial spoon that would have been used as a part of the Cahoba ritual, which was an important tradition for them.
Well, once again, this has been an amazing conversation, and hope to have some more and another have it back sometime in the future for another conversation on this very important topic.
Yes.
Because I think it's extremely important that we talk about the native peoples. And Dr. Atkinson, thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Once again, thank you for being here, Dr. Atkinson. It's a pleasure to speak with you today, and it's a pleasure to this conversation. And let's talk again in the future.
Okay, thank you for having me, and I hope you found the content interesting. Not just you, but your audience too. All right. Seneca Akakona, which means abundant blessings.
Yeah, and being a time was the Jewish, we say Lehitrahat, which means so long, I've seen you.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Bye.